And let me quickly introduce our speaker again, because many of them, they have missed out the first sessions. And you can imagine that I'm actually speaking very fast to try to catch up with the time. We have Levente Szabados. He's actually the lecturer at Frankfurt School. He's actually also the lead consultant at Neuron Solutions. He's our one of our first professor that actually lead many of our master students at the business school to know about AI, even they don't really have a technical background or knowledge about coding. But we know within a week he taught us how to create our own AI model. That's why we think it's actually our great privilege to have him in here to discuss about the key topic about Chatgpt, since it's such a popular topic that actually keep people awake at the evening. We also have Dennis Loechel. He's a consultant, and he's also a master student at Frankfurt School, and we are both studying the Master of Data Analytics and Management program. Thank you everyone for joining, even though we have this 10-minute delay, you guys do wait for us. And now let's just quickly move to the discussions sessions. So left based on the whole demonstration you showed, there's actually one key question that come out in my mind. It's about the relationship between the prompt and the result. And of course, there's also a key starting question for those who have already used ChatGPT and haven't used it before. And one of the most common misconceptions about ChatGPT, it's not many of people claim that it's not providing meaningful output. For example, some of the professional professors that I know from the top university, because they are being worried that ChatGPT will be the best cheating tool for their students. So they put in the research questions or the exam question into ChatGPT and see what results they will get. And then they are quite disappointed. But I think it's important for us to address the fact that, the prompts there is not just the key to open the door. It's a process that you continue to monitor and engage with the ChatGPT. It's like teaching your kids how to walk. So what do both of you think about the relationship between the prompts and the final result of ChatGPT?
It's absolutely crucial. So as you say, the way you ask a question, the way you formulate the question, it's crucial. In the sense, imagine this model as being the best improvisation theater player ever. And I mean, there are two rules of the improvisation theater. One is never break the role. So you always keep with the role and never think twice, just say what you want to say. So it's basically just an artist in the sense of it just very confidently says the first thing that it comes into its mind. The real magic in prompting and prompt engineering became kind of a professional topic in the sense of people spending time to figuring out how to structure the question so that you get the desired result. We also hold some lectures in that, which are, there is even a company who set up a pretty nice kind of material of learning material about how to do prompting. But I think as a one sentence summary, the interesting point in this is like, it's a process. It's not that you put in the thing and you expect the final result. It's never so. Remember that these models were trained to interact with someone. So basically, the more you can interactively refine what you're looking for, make it longer, make it shorter, submit like omit these parts, put in those parts. As much as you work on the text of how to ask, as much the model can help you with giving certain outputs and leading your mind of, okay, maybe I would try this way, maybe I would try that way. So it's always think of it as an interactive tool.
Yeah. I would definitely agree with that. I think prompt engineering plays a vital role in how leverage language models such as ChatGPT and how to leverage its performance correctly. I mean, you can give context, you can give structure, you can design tasks, you can reword things as Lev just mentioned in the form of a theater performance, and then reword that based upon the output you get. So as much effort as you put in, that is sort of what you will get out, but don't expect it in just a few steps or in one step, but in the long run, sort of reiterate of what you got out and and have the kind of structure in which way you prompt ChatGPT.
For sure, for sure. We are already seeing people releasing papers and documents on the set of prompts that you get. For example, like using one example, it's Midjourney. Using specific descriptions or terms or vocabulary that you would get specifically results or even outstanding outstanding results. But that means we can develop a dictionary of prompts, and people can actually use this dictionary of prompts to generate the best results and the best performance of ChatGPT. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, not just a dictionary, there are things which are called prompt marketplaces. I mean, literally they exist. Is that like, this is the nicest formulation I came up with for writing this kind of thing. And when it's a very witty advertisement text, then this was my formulation or that was my formulation. So yeah, this is becoming a kind of cottage industry in the sense of prompting. But I think the most important thing is that there is no such thing as professional prompters versus non-professional. Whoever has the attitude of being interactive and reflective enough can get pretty good results. But it's a patience game. You have to try.
That's a very nice and warm words, because we are seeing there are so many new roles coming up called with the names of like prompt engineer, or chef Chatgpt and head of Chatgpt of some company. But in fact, it's not. There's no. I mean, there's gateway, but there's no obvious gateway out there preventing people from using this technology. But of course, we will quickly touch base on this very soon. And both of you have mentioned the process of continually monitor, ChatGPT. There's actually another one very interesting question and debate that come out. It's about the consciousness of ChatGPT. So on one side, it's very simple for me to just throw a question to you asking whether ChatGPT has consciousness. But I also took a few days to think about it, and I realized it's a much more complicated question than just a yes or no answer. What do you guys think about it first?
I mean, there are layers of the answer for sure. The obvious answer is that in any traditional way, it is not. And that's why I wanted to put it akin to a parrot, because a parrot is not necessarily knowing what it speaks. So there is no expectation for us to look at the parrot and think that it really reflects on the things and it really gives back this answer. Wow. No, it's just parroting back stuff. But this is kind of a half answer. If I really want to go with what Christiane asked, is like a bit more deeper, I would suggest that it's not a conscious, but it's a subconscious. So in the sense of all the associations, these games when psychologists even in the 30s and 40s made people play these games of association. If I tell you this word, then what word you say? And this association game tells a lot about your subconscious activities. And I think exactly this association game is going on. So basically, ChatGPT can be understood as the language unconsciousness of like the internet's unconscious or subconscious, or these kind of Freudian view on the internet, so to say, which is, I mean, sometimes you have to even Freud had some problems when you look into the unconscious mind deep enough, pretty nasty things can be in there. As with the internet, if you look deep enough, there are pretty nasty things in there. So there is not a bad analogy, I have to say.
So you would say Freud is, as you say, ChatGPT is like the id in Freud.
Yes, so absolutely. It just tells you. It just literally tells you.
I mean, it does have there are some filter elements in there, but I completely agree. Sometimes when you prompt, you get sort of the answer out right away, and it gives you sort of this no holds barred view of what you just asked. And if you don't restrict sort of any context, then you said, okay, this is a very surprising answer. But to answer your question, Christiane, from my perspective, this is a very long question to answer, because you can ask yourself, of course, what is consciousness? And there's, of course, research, what has been done. I wouldn't have thought to mention Kurt Gödel right now, but his incomplete theorem of having systems prove that there can be complete or non-complete is, for example, one of those that limits the development of a sort of general artificial intelligence. But as I think I stated before, it is a step a very big step forward in what we've seen so far in the basis of a language model. And that, I think, already having been at this step now, it might have been a surprise from GPT-3 to 3.5 to 4, but this is a relatively short time frame for as much as the theory already exists. So I think this is remarkable in terms of the time frame, but of course the technology and the theory has been around for a lot longer.
Because taking a step back, when it comes to the definition of consciousness, it have something to do with self-awareness, self-consciousness, or whether this AI model, this person's or this creatures is able to give direct response or have a feelings on things. That this might be a very rough description and thoughts about consciousness. But I always believe ChatGPT is just more like a language model. When the reason why people believe ChatGPT have consciousness and able to replace human is because it's able to transcript into a human understandable language that actually scare and surprise a lot of people. But then this question come back to my mind because 2 days ago I saw Stanford's it's actually collaborated with Google, and it created a simulation video games with 20 or 25 characters in there, and it's nodding. And then those 25 characters behind them is the ChatGPT, and then they are you provide them with like some characteristics, and then they have the ability to memorize what's happening in this game, which is I think a very important thing before developing consciousness for an AI. And that started to confuse me because it shows they're able to spontaneously do lots of things in the past. Let's say 20 days in the game, they're able to host party, people are able to respond given their characteristics and given their specialty. But does that confuse me for the wrong reasons, or is it possible that ChatGPT become a key component of another AI algorithm that can enable consciousness of another AI algorithm or characters in a game? What do you guys think about it?
Yeah, I mean, since I'm a Buddhist, I'm very much enjoying that you are kind of in trouble. And not because I'm a sadist. So no. I think like chasing consciousness and asking the question of what is consciousness is the question that is, I mean, from me as a Buddhist, like this is the question that one has to ask. So this is like, if I would quote a nice Zen master, yeah, that's the point. What? That's the point. What? So the more confused you are, the better, in a sense. No, I mean, joke aside, just if you want to be more concrete, is that what we understood is that the mental activity that is going on in our head is decomposable to certain subtasks. So much of what we do can be decomposed. And one big chunk we now successfully captured with this, I would say, linguistic subconscious activity. The interesting is that this is not in itself a thing. Remember that for like being factual or being able to act on anything out of the box, it already requires connections to other systems, like a search engine, like a knowledge base, like an external database of facts, a reasoning engine, and so on. So currently, I think the most up-to-date view on these things is that if we ever want to construct more and more complicated machines of artificial intelligence, forget about consciousness, but just agents that are more and more useful, most possibly what we will find is that we have to Lego it together from different systems. And the interesting point that happened is that the glue that sticks these together happens to be something like language. Much of what we do in programming is based on human language because programming languages were created for humans. What we communicate with amongst each other is based on language because that's just what we do, and so on. So simulating much of the activities of what we do and consider useful in an economic sense can be somehow glued together with some systems talking to each other or talking to us. And I think the important paradigm of this like generative language thing is that enables systems to talk. And that's why it's pretty powerful, and more powerful than one could imagine, in the sense of yesterday I held a demonstration for my own colleagues that I could successfully prompt ChatGPT together with some external memory to start to program some stuff instead of me. So I was able to put it into a nice way of usage, that there was an external system, and I just gave a website that described that system, and it's kind of generated code based on that and started to talk to the system, and so on and so on. So it's basically an automation tool via language to computer systems, which is pretty powerful.
Does this refer to that this is referred to the auto GPT, auto GPT?
Yes, which is something like that. Something like that. It's I had my own experience or experiments with that, but yeah, it's very much alike. Very much alike.
And just based on that, I think that's where sort of the subdivision of human task, language in between tasks, whatever that human task may be, sort of the communication mechanism. And now that we're at the stage where a language model such as ChatGPT can communicate at that stage and not minimize, but alleviate some human tasks such as development. And in the future, of course, this will get better. And there's other solutions that we've seen as well. And I think this can be extremely valuable. And we shouldn't have the expectation of expecting one giant system to take everything away that a human does, but sort of have this view of subdomain that develop over time.
And followed by this discussion of consciousness, there's another phenomenon that we observe after ChatGPT have launched for quite a while. It's the fear and resistance of ChatGPT. I mean, this is a very common topic that we discuss when we try to talk about AI, and it's a critical aspect to consider when we try to implement generative AI or technology or digitalizations in the corporate levels. So and followed by that, there are quite a few argument discussion in regards to the ownership and the responsibility of the output of ChatGPT. What do you? I mean, this is a very common question. This happened for many years. It's not just happened for ChatGPT, but in general, what do you guys think about this?
Well, I mean, responsibility as we know it is always pertaining to humans. So as long as we don't convince ourselves that some system is as equivalent to us that it has rights, then as long as it doesn't have rights, it doesn't have responsibilities. So that just doesn't work. So in this sense, it has to be somewhat fair and somewhat equal. So I mean, under current circumstances, responsibility is always human. Now, refining on that, it's pretty similar to nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is like, let us be honest, it's a pretty deadly and pretty dangerous way of doing technology. Nuclear technology is always very dangerous. But nonetheless, in certain cases, it's extremely useful. And we kind of collectively developed some ways to live with it and live with it productively. In the sense of there are these ways of behavior that enable it to be super safe under circumstances, which is like that's an interesting thing that whenever a new technology comes in, we always think of that it's in a raw form. It's always understandable. My favorite example is that the shopping carts in companies in grocery stores. Whenever the guy who came up with this idea and patented it and created the first thing, he put it into grocery stores, and people literally didn't know what to do with it. And he had to hire actors that were pushing that cart back and forth and showing that, look, you can put your groceries into the grocery cart. And until people kind of accustomed to or kind of came up with the right behavioral attitude to a shopping cart, people were not using shopping carts. So this is the same with any technology, especially with a technology which is pretty quickly developing and pretty radical in the scope. So I think what's going on here is that somehow, first and foremost, I encourage you to be the person who pushes the shopping cart first, because A, it's very useful, B, it's super fun. But nonetheless, I think the takeaway here is that it's an adaptation procedure. The big question is, can we speed up the adaptation procedure of people to be as quick as the new technologies come out?
And I think the key here is also to have this element of exposure. I mean, there's lots of people who've already had exposure to ChatGPT as a tool, but there's of course people who haven't had exposure at all and don't even know how to get a proper access. I think in the beginning, and what led as the example also you mentioned was the shopping cart, which I find very interesting, is this fear of the unknown. That first, when you have a new technology, you're not quite sure how to use it, what it does, and what it can do for you. And I think in this case of ChatGPT is that once people get around to using it and realizing the benefit for themselves that this might have, then over time they become used to changes within the system or further development. But of course, this only comes with repeated exposure.
Indeed.
For sure, and followed by this implementation process and this common fear and resistance about AI technology. It of course bring up concern on digital divide, on inequalities in a society. It also bring in new challenge or actually I think it's a new opportunity for people to actually think about our current education system and how are we going to adopt a new way and learn new technology and new knowledge as an individual. So as a takeaway, what do you guys think about it? Like, how can we really adopt into the current dynamic and flow? Is our old education systems no longer valid, or we need to find a new way to dive through? What do you guys think about it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have very strong opinions on that since I'm teaching in the current education system, you know. So that means for example, as a policy, I'm very strongly pushing towards not just tolerating ChatGPT as a tool, for example, but maybe actively encouraging people to use ChatGPT as a tool, even for exams in certain cases, or some submissions of stuff. An interesting thing happens is that if you look back to the history of how education changed, people were completely shocked about calculators, pocket calculators. It's just that mathematical knowledge will go away with pocket calculators. That was always a problem. And like even before that, like with printing press, people are not memorizing a lot of stuff and so on. So interestingly, that the balance always shifts towards more and more mechanical parts of what has to be learned, remembered, executed are pushed out to certain devices. There is a mechanical device doing the calculation. There is a mechanical device that gives you the information. The interesting thing is that what do you really want to achieve, or what is the strategy to achieve it, and how you reflect on where you are and are you moving to the right part, this is more and more becoming important. So the funny thing is that it forces you to become more reflective and not less reflective, interestingly enough. That's why I wanted to emphasize that also in the prompt engineering part, that it enhances your daily reflectivity in the sense of you are literally forced to think about, oh, did I formulate this question right? Did I really tell what I wanted to tell, or I was just automatically writing out stuff without any second thoughts? So I think what is very strongly coming up as a goal for education is an extremely strong emphasis on reflection.
I agreed. I mean, in part, sort of the disliberalization that you speak of can sort of be a gateway to help solve problems in circumstances such as coursework and circumstances such as exams and in sort of other learning environments that actually does not, stop thinking, but actually encourages thinking because it exposes people to new viewpoints, to knowledge, but also to their own refinement of their own capabilities. And I quite remember, even though I was not born yet, the sign in 1979 from professors, don't please ban calculators, because not everybody will have a calculator with us later. And then we had the phone about 40 years later, smartphone.
Sure.
But I think society always adapts, and education in that as well as that, as it is at the forefront, always adapts to new technologies. And it's all about utilizing technologies correctly rather than sort of deliberalizing their usage.
I totally agree. I also think ChatGPT, I'm actually very optimistic toward the technology. I think it actually free up people's hands, first of all. Secondly, it actually emphasizes a lot more on critical thinking, because you need to be very conscious with the question you ask, which is a very challenging skills for lots of people, to be honest, and also be critical about the answer you receive and even about yourself. So I think a good education system is there to enable people to explore themselves, explore about the universe, and be critical about, the opinions and values they once held in the past. And I do think this technology is able to accelerate this process. In fact, there are actually a lot more we can actually discuss about, but unfortunately, we have already passed the time. I'm going to leave it out here, but I hope in the future we are able to host another events, live streaming events again with no technical issue and challenge. I do want to apologize to everyone, on LinkedIn and also in Zoom. And I do appreciate to all those participants, like 30-40 participants staying until the end of this webinar. We will convert this into a podcast. We will upload that into Spotify. We'll upload that into Apple Podcasts, and you're able to listen to it again. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Lev. Thank you, Dennis, for your time joining in. We would like to wish you a very good evening. And that's all for today's sessions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.